Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to New Worlds November. This is a new BookTube event celebrating science fiction. I'm one of the hosts. It was created by Scott and Becky at the Bookish Bryants. And it celebrates science fiction, but of course that's a huge undertaking, which is why we're kind of hoping that the event will have legs for future years and future hosts. But we did want to narrow the field. So the New Worlds November for 2021 is celebrating short stories. Anything fewer than 200 pages. And also we have prompts from week to week. We have 4 prompts for the month of November. And we are right now ending the week where the prompt is time travel, which is a stereotypical staple of the genre, but has never really done anything for me. And done less and less with me the more I read about quantum entanglement and things like that in nonfiction. So I've been sort of ranging all around for this week, looking at older stories, looking at ways that you can do time travel in a story without doing too much violence to what we already know about physics and about thermodynamics and whatnot. And I've been finding that writers were a lot more cavalier with taking liberties with the known science when there was less known science. I think if I were to do the head count, I haven't done this scientifically, but if I do the head count, I think you would notice a steady drop-off in time travel stories in the last 30 years. In the square-bound pulp periodicals that I am reading for New Worlds November, I'm not going to anthologies or to classic novellas of any kind. I'm going to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Analog, and Asimov. And I was concentrating on the year 2021, but that's been sort of rough going. For some of the prompts that we've been dealing with. So I have been ranging around for my quarry. And today I went back to Asimov's from 2017. And this is the title story here is by Sean Monahan. It's Crimson Birds of Small Miracles. It's right for it to be their title story. It is a brilliant, brilliant story. I'm afraid, unfortunately, there's nothing else in this issue that is as good as that story. So I'm glad that their editors know enough to know that. But I'm talking about a story here deep in the issue called Winter Timeshare by Ray Naylor, who has been in a bunch of anthologies. I think I remember enjoying some of his stories, but I couldn't. He's not a quick recall part of the mental furniture author for me at all. And Winter Timeshare is set in a future Istanbul, which is extremely well evoked in this story. Not just the future Istanbul, but the present. The nature of Istanbul is really well evoked. It's got a wonderful sense of atmosphere. And there are 2 main characters who meet just once a year. They take time out from their jobs just once a year to meet in Istanbul. That's where they met and fell in love. That's where they have all sorts of favorite places. That's where they go when they're together. But it's a future world in which there are high-rises. That's what they're called. High-rises in which scientists and geneticists, chemists, astrophysicists, pure mathematicians of all kinds live and toil for the betterment of mankind. We get the impression later on in the story that most of mankind not only doesn't know what they do, but wouldn't really care if they did. Let's see here. Regina, that's one of the characters, had never thought deeply about the difference between blanks and Istanbul's permanent residents, the locals, as they were called by some, but not by Regina, who liked to think of herself as a local, and the city as her city. Blanks are basically the artificial android bodies that the inhabitants of those high-rises occupy when they are out and about, when they get time to themselves. They take a blank and go out into the city. Doesn't seem like they go out in their own corporeal forms. Seems like they transfer their consciousness to these blanks or protect themselves that way somehow. And when they vacation in these places, well, the economy of places like Istanbul are entirely dependent on the seasonal commerce of blanks. And it makes the residents, some of them, very resentful. That hadn't she earned that by returning here every year for so long? Over the last few days, she and Ilke, that's the other main character, had made their rounds, as they called it. Despite the bad weather, they had visited all their old places, eating fresh fish on Galata Bridge, walking the land wall that had protected for 1,000 years an empire that had been destroyed well over 1,000 years ago. On the third evening, from an open-topped ferry crossing the strait to the Asian side, they had watched the interstellar array on one of Istanbul's distant hills fire the consciousness of another brave, doomed volunteer into the stars, riding a laser into failure and certain death. The blanks on the ferry had applauded. The locals had hardly seemed to notice. That's what I meant by transferring consciousness. It seems like that's what happens. The people in the high-rises don't actually ever leave. They just transfer their consciousnesses to various things, whether it's a laser beam exploring outer space or blanks in order to enjoy time with each other. And one of the characters is involved. You might think, well, what does this have to do with time travel? Does one of the characters travel in time? One of the characters, high-rises, is involved in an extremely granular, moment-by-moment, smell and scent and taste and sight reconstruction of war in ancient Greece. And there are people that are involved. They just go through these extremely sense-around simulations all year long. That's their job. They don't know the reason why. The powers that be in the high-rise are working the program towards some form of historical inquiry or social engineering or whatever. The people involved don't know the reason. They just go through the simulations over and over again. And that is the framework, that is the bracket of the events in the story. The events in the story take place in the present day of this future Istanbul and involve the strained, yearning relationship between our two main characters. They want more time with each other, hence the title, and also involve in the background, but getting more and more, there's an incident in the story that highlights that resentment between the locals and the blanks. And that just gets worse. That is actually the climax of the story, is that just getting much worse. That is the bulk of the story. It's the framing device of the story that has one of our characters back in her simulation in ancient Greece, living through it, feeling it, going through it minute by minute, over and over again. And I was thinking about that. It was a pleasure to reread the story. It's actually very, very good. And I was thinking of that. I was thinking, okay, well, that is another way that you could convincingly do time travel without doing violence to our increasing knowledge of how time may or may not work. That's another way that you could do it. It would effectively be time travel. The character is lost in that simulation. She might know in her head that it's a simulation, but it's totally real. When she's a prisoner of war, she feels every scratch, every bruise, every cut, and keeps on feeling it in what she feels as real time's duration. So that sort of counts. That sort of counts as a time travel story, I think. At least partly it does. It shows you not only the inventiveness of the writers that are regularly tapped for Asimov. Asimov is my favorite of the 3 magazines that I'm reading this month. But also the lengths to which they have to go to tell anything like a time travel story. I'm going to keep searching. I'm going to keep searching. I've got a couple more days of time travel to do before we move on to the last prompt. But that's your New Worlds November video for today. It's a story that I can recommend, an author I can recommend. He didn't make the cover, I noticed. A lot of other authors did, but he didn't. But that's all right. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope your own science fiction reading is going well for the month, as we're now well past the halfway point. But I will wrap this up, and I will talk science fiction with you again tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.